Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we are going to be diving into the second season of Netflix's live-action adaptation of One Piece. I'm a little sick, or recovering from a sick, whatever you want to call it. So apologies if my voice sounds a little less enthused, but yeah, it's finally here after a long 3-year wait from season 1's release. And so, yeah, I'll be going into my thoughts and reviews on the second season. I'll also use this opportunity to kind of nerd out on some of the smaller details. And this episode will include spoilers for the second season. But I'll also kind of get into things that go into spoiler aspects for things that happen later in the series. But I will sort of start that at the latter half of the episode, so that for those that just want to talk about this particular season, won't get spoiled for anything that goes beyond what happens in season 2. So yeah, let's kind of get into that. Overall, this second season of the live action was amazing. I absolutely loved it. First, I want to thank everyone involved in the making of this, from the folks at Tomorrow Studios, Netflix, the cast and crew, for treating this with such care, respect, and passion for this project, because it really shines through in every aspect, honoring the source material that we all love. Like, the sheer amount of details, Easter eggs, and references is staggering. I was able to find several of them, but I know for a fact that I missed a ton more, and just the amount of care and attention to detail that they all provided throughout this show is incredible. I think the biggest thing is I just love how well realized all the characters are, from the main characters all the way to like the throwaway cameos, even the background characters. But the story of this season has to be Chopper. I can't believe they freaking did it. Chopper is so damn well realized. Like, he is cute, funny, cool, and heartwarming, just like he is in the anime and the manga. It's incredible. They got him almost perfect. I'll get into a little bit more details in the spoiler section about more so with Chopper. But yeah, overall, amazing, because he was probably the thing I was most sort of nervous about them adapting. Like, if they can't get Chopper right, then this live action series is over. I mean, he's one of the main characters. He's one of the more pivotal characters. So if you can't get him right and he looks weird or he just looks cheap, then the series just won't last. It won't work. And also, from like a marketing and merchandising standpoint, like, Chopper is the mascot essentially. So if you can't get him right or looking right, then you're not going to sell any merchandise. And again, like, money talks. And so the series, again, will not continue without a good Chopper. And they understood this and they got him exactly right. Secondly, the Baroque Works agents, especially Miss All Sunday and Miss Wednesday, are absolutely incredible. It was a little, iffy in some instances, but overall, I loved how, with the benefit of hindsight, they were able to sort of incorporate things that aren't revealed till much later in the story without the retcons. And all the Baroque Works agents look and feel exactly how they do, and in some cases, they're even better than they are in the live action. Like, for instance, Mr. Nine, like Daniel Lasker, I don't know what it is, but he brought something to Mr. Nine that just wasn't there in the manga and the anime. Like, you really like feel a little bit more like sadder about this character going away. And yeah, I think he just did an amazing job playing that character. Now, speaking of the main characters, though, their origin stories are mostly done, and they were handled well in season 1. So season 2 actually was able to devote more time to expanding the world. And even with the limited runtime, they were able to fill, the world of One Piece and the Grand Line, or at least the early part of the Grand Line, with so much rich detail with the sets and locales, the characters, and the history and the world building. And so, which is something that One Piece has obviously excelled at. But that's not to say that the Straw Hats didn't get any attention, because they certainly did. Like, all of them had great moments to further develop not just their characters, but like with the manga and anime, you get to see a lot more of the bonds and relationships get developed. So, like, now that the individual characters have been established since season 1, now you get to explore sort of how each one of them interact with each other. and develop their sort of bonds and relationships, which I think were really great. And of course, some characters were tweaked to fit the live action format, just like they were in season 1. And some of them are just better in over their anime counterparts, particularly Sanji and Usopp. During this part of the story, they really got a lot more better characterization, a little bit more love, and yeah, I think they, like, I already loved Sanji and Usopp even during this time period in the manga and the anime, but I feel like they were much better. And I love how the episode structures, like, they wrote it in a way where each sort of arc or episode focused on a specific character. Like Logtown was Luffy's episode. Twin Capes was a little bit more focused on Nami and her insecurities about how her skills would translate. Whiskey Peak was Zoro's, obviously. Little Garden was Usopp. And then Drum was kind of a combination of the episode 6 being more BB focused, whereas obviously episode 7 and 8 were more to develop Chopper. Sanji is the only one that kind of gets left out of this sort of structure, because in the source material in the manga, Sanji obviously doesn't have a huge part in a lot of these arcs. Like, he's missing from a lot of Logtown, Whiskey Peak, and Little Garden, because structurally speaking, he was supposed to be missing from that, so that the Baroque works don't actually know that he's in existence, so that they can keep up that sort of that Mr. Prince mystery. And so, yeah, unfortunately, they really couldn't deviate from that too much. But I mean, Sanji still gets a lot of great moments to shine, especially that moment in Drum Castle. The action is so much better in this season. Overall, it's shot and lit better. The choreography is much better. Like, you get a lot of these wide sweeping shots, particularly when Zoro takes on the 100 bounty hunters at Whiskey Peak. And there's more of it, including the visual and special effects. They really give it like a real tangible feel to it. And even like Luffy's stretching, like Gomu Gomu abilities look a lot better too. There are a couple exceptions, like Alvida's fight in that first episode in Logtown. That one felt really like a Saturday morning cartoon. Like, she just didn't quite feel like she was an actual threat, since it didn't even seem like she was sliding all that fast or with any real momentum. So that one was a little hokey. But I mean, even in the manga and the anime, she was never really that big of a threat. The production itself takes an amazing step up, and this was a strong suit in the original too, but the sets are even bigger, they're more detailed, and even, with the better lighting and color grading, it looks a lot better. But I think my favorite aspect is the costume design. They are so freaking good. Like, the costumes in season 1 were good, but I cannot believe how well these were all brought to life. Like, there's this great InStyle magazine video that details sort of the process that the costume department and the costume designing, how that work went into the creation. And I highly recommend that video, because it's awesome what their like thought process was to translating the manga and the anime designs into real life, so that it actually could be functional. Like, I mean, all the Baroque Works agents' costumes, particularly like Miss All Sundays, Mr. 5, Miss Valentine, Mr. 3, Miss Golden Week, the Marines, like Smoker and Tashigi, all look like they exactly look like in the manga and the anime. It's uncanny. And similarly, Crocus too looks exactly like he was lifted right off of the page, as well as the Roombar Pirates, Yorkie and Brooke. They all look so good, and the costumes look incredible, as well as the Straw Hats. Each one of them, they're all referenced from different color spreads and different references from either the anime or from the manga itself with the costume choices. They all look exactly how they look like in the source material, and it's just brought to life. It's incredible. And in addition to the costumes and sets and islands, those were all, brought to life incredibly well. Obviously, they can't capture quite the scale of the manga, but given the constraints, I thought every island that they went to was done incredibly well. The only thing that was a little off were the giants when they got to Little Garden. You can tell kind of the lighting wasn't quite consistent when compositing the two. You can feel that they were in two different locations, but I still think it worked. It never really took me out of it. I did notice it, but I think it still worked pretty well. I love that Netflix is committing to using as many real built sets and locales for shooting instead of relying so heavily on green screen, just like in the first season, because it really helps to ground all the crazy, ridiculous things that you're seeing on screen. And it makes it more, feel very tangible and real. And so it grounds a lot of that. And yeah, I thought that was an awesome choice. I mean, obviously, they built all the ships and like the Mary and the Roomba Pirates ship. I forgot what that ship is called. But a lot of those ships are all built. And so, yeah, just amazing. And Logetown was also a built set. And yeah, it all looks amazing. Moving on to the writing, I think the comedy overall is a lot more funnier this season too. I found myself laughing a lot more, especially, there are some kind of cringy, almost MCU-esque one-liners that I feel like doesn't really work throughout the season, because I don't know that One Piece is really that type of comedy. But also like the random like dialogue with weird and random cursing, which I think a few times it was funny, but I felt like they kept using it too much, and it got to the point where it was a little overused just to kind of be like edgelordy for the shock value. But when used like liberally, like that much, I feel like it had some diminishing returns and it starts to get a little cringe. But overall though, the writing and the comedy, I think it was pretty good. The dialogue and some of the action can be a little corny. It still captures the series' tone really well. And again, one thing I love about this adaptation is it's never shy or ashamed of how stupid or absurd the elements of the source material that they're, adapting. And they really lean into it. And I just love that about season 2. Also, speaking of another thing that I didn't quite enjoy as much is I really didn't think that the whole Wapple's monster army was all that great. I thought it was really weird and kind of out of place. But I did like the fact that they did make a reference to the quote-unquote fusion of Chess Marimo from the manga, where they had that one monster just be a guy sitting on the shoulders of another guy. So that was entertaining, that they were able to still somewhat fit that in without actually having to do Chess Marimo. But yeah, the last thing I will say in sort of the non-spoiler section is that I really like that Netflix and Tomorrow Studios staff, and likely Oda, are using the live action to kind of retool this retelling of the story to better incorporate things and add in all the retcons that were added in later on that weren't revealed till obviously later in the series, that they can now add these things and incorporate them back in with the benefit of hindsight. And I'll get into this a little bit more in the spoiler section. And that is an aspect that I think is really fun for us who who are obsessed with the series, or at least know what happens all the way up to the present, in the current story. So there's that added fun for us who know what's about to happen and are very familiar with the story, but there's still new stuff. And so I really liked all that. But yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about in sort of the season 2 live action section of this. From here on out, let's get into a little bit more details about the things I found in season 2 that kind of go beyond that. And for this section, I will try and keep it to only the things that we've talked about in this podcast. So basically everything covered up until the Zou arc. I won't go beyond that, and I'll have a third section that talks about things that go beyond the Zou arc, as well as I may even have a fourth section that'll kind of warn folks that talk about things that go beyond the anime, that talk about things that have only happened in the manga so far as well, because there are a couple things. But so let's get just into sort of the spoiler section for everything that we've covered throughout this podcast, so up till Zou. So yeah, let's talk about the characters, because the characters I think are the best things about this. So starting with Chopper, because he was kind of the main deal with this season. And I have to start with Chopper because going into the second season, like I said, he was my most anticipated aspect, but also my most apprehensive due to the nature of how challenging he was going to be to bring him to life. Like I mentioned earlier, they pretty much knocked it out of the park with him. Chopper was incredibly well done. He looked and felt like Chopper, but in real life. He felt like a real character occupying space that interacted with all the characters. Michaela Hoover does an amazing job bringing that childlike naivety and innocence to him perfectly, as well as being really funny and cute, and even brings it when he needs to hold the emotion of the more heavier scenes. She even got how he ugly cries with how he just basically howls over the top when he's like really crying, and particularly that scene where he sees Hirulook's Sakura Cure. And his walk point also looks great too, like his deer form. And I love that how he transforms between the two. That was really well done. Obviously, the one slight knock on Chopper is his heavy point. It's a guy in a suit with a prosthetic mask, and the mask looks a little weird. And like, I'm with him being, looking monstrous, but it just looks a little too human, not human, which crosses into that sort of uncanny valley creepy area. I think they could have made him look a little less unsettling, especially the teeth in the mouth. I think that's what really I have an issue with. But also, since it was another person acting in the suit, whenever he'd speak in Heavy Point, it was obviously Michaela Hoover's voice ADR'd over, and that had also mixed results for me too. But obviously, there's not really much that they could do about that. They did the best that they could with that. But yeah, I mean, overall, I think Chopper was great. Even Heavy Point, you know what? It worked. It wasn't so bad that I was like, God, they need to do something about this. The one thing I was disappointed was that he didn't use his rumble balls during that fight with Chess. But I'm glad that they reassured us and teased that he does have them and that they will be used in season 3 for Arabasta. So yeah, I am looking forward to see him actually use his rumble balls and seeing the other 4 points. Particularly like the harder ones I feel like are arm point and horn point. Seeing him do that one. I think guard point is obviously pretty easy. You just make him a big fluffy ball. Jumping point, I think they could easily do that one as well with CGI, or maybe even a guy in a suit. You never know. But the other thing when it comes to Chopper is from a story perspective, the only thing I had an issue with is during the flashback, when Hirulook finds Chopper, he finds him in his cute brain point form instead of heavy point like it was in the manga. The reason for this is because the scene is to show that Hirulook decided to help Chopper despite how scary and monstrous he looked. That's why that scene is so important in the manga. And that was one of the reasons that made Hirulook different and more compassionate, while also being one of the reasons Chopper decided to trust Hirulook. By having Hirulook find Chopper in his sort of cutest form, it kind of undercuts his character a bit because, I mean, for any of us, like, who wouldn't look at Brainpoint Chopper and want to help, he's so cute in that form. It's like finding a wounded puppy. You see a lot of those on Instagram. You just immediately want to help him. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, if you find this like monstrous, like abominable snowman looking guy, all wounded and trying to attack you when you're trying to help it, like you have to have like a special kind of compassion and kindness to want to continue to help them. And that's what Hirulook does in the manga and the anime. And so I think by having him in his hybrid form, I think it undercuts that moment a little bit. But again, that's just a really minor complaint. Next, let's get into Usopp, because Usopp was my second favorite part about this season. I love what they did with Usopp this season. Of course, Usopp was severely underutilized in season 1, to the point where he was basically left out of his own origin arc in Syrup Village. But here they really made sure to highlight what Usopp brings to the table in terms of his mechanical and engineering skills, like fixing the steering rudder on the Mary, fixing Crocus's door after Luffy busted it down, building BB that grapple bow, etc. And there were so many moments where he was really useful. And he also had way more moments where he was supportive of the other Straw Hats or BB and showed how much heart he had for just being someone to talk to because of how relatable Usopp was as a normal, quote-unquote, everyman. And then there's the thing that I love the most, which is that he had an actual growth arc where the story felt like Usopp finally discovered what his dream actually meant to him. and how he might actually realize that sort of nebulous dream of becoming a brave warrior of the sea. And that also happened in Little Garden in the manga, but it was much less of the focus. And Usopp was a major force in Little Garden in the live action, basically being the hero of that arc, willing to essentially die to save his crew. And I love Usopp in this season. And Jacob Gibson gives an amazing performance as Usopp when he needed to be serious, but also in Usopp's usual comedic moments, he shines as well. Like, he is an amazing cast as Usopp. Like, I mean, they're all amazingly cast, but I feel like he is somehow able to capture the best of Usopp and really bring forth that without sort of the detractions that he has in the manga and the anime. Moving on to Zoro, I really like the improvements they made to how Zoro is portrayed. I think with season 1, they made him really brooding and like stoic and forgot the more silly and playful side of Zoro, especially during this part of the story. I like that he isn't always this like strong, silent, cool guy all the time in season 2. They give him moments where he's awkward, like when he interacts with Tashigi for the first time, particularly the part where he gets insecure when she says, "Are you lost?" He's like, "No, I'm not lost." And also the probably the best joke in the whole season, the uvula joke where he responds, "So it's a girl whale," which is taken from Monster House, but it's still nonetheless hilarious when he says it. Or how when he tries to save Usopp from falling into the stomach acid, he brings out his homemade spear and it immediately falls apart. I also like how he's more three-dimensional with things like how his loss to Mihawk still weighs heavy in his mind, or how he gets anxious when waiting while Luffy and Sanji take Nami up to the Drum Rockies, to the point where Usopp kind of snaps at him a bit and tells him, like, be useful, like you're just doing nothing. And I like that interaction between the Straw Hats that's kind of added in the live action. And one thing that is understandable but disappointing is kind of the lack of the Santoryu. Like, I know it's really hard to make that work in live action, but he just barely uses it. Like, even for like finishing moves, like it's just never feels like he's actually using three swords. I hope they're able to kind of figure out how to do that better. I did love that they had, they added the Yaki Onigiri and stuff like that, but he barely ever uses Santoryu, and even when he does, it doesn't look like it's doing anything. But overall, I love how they softened Zoro up a little bit and gave him more like funny moments and more playful moments. Moving on to Sanji, he is easily my favorite adaptation, to the point where I like this version of Sanji over his original incarnation. That's not to say I don't like the original Sanji, because he's still one of my top 3 favorite characters in the entire series from the manga and the anime. I love Sanji, but the live action Sanji has all the best qualities of manga Sanji, but excludes his sort of perviness. And like this first season, replaces it with sort of this like flirtiness, but also like it accentuates his kindness. And I feel like they add even more depth to him by showing his emotional sort of depth. And I particularly love their interpretation of his sort of relationship with Nami. Instead of his sort of over-the-top simping for her, he treats her like a dear friend whom he shares an extra special bond with. And this works so well and leads to some really heartfelt moments, especially once she gets sick from the Kestia bite. And I'll go into this a little bit more, in the spoiler section where we talk about specific moments that got changed or added, because this is a pretty, it was a really awesome change. I love that little speech that he has with Nami, talking about his mom and stuff like that. And we'll get into a little bit more about that a little later. All right, so Miss All Sunday, or Robin, was freaking fantastic. Like Chopper, the addition of another future Straw Hat was perfect. I feel like she stole the show in so many of the scenes she was in. Like Lara Bova, like the rest of the cast, was so perfect. She captures Robin's sort of mysterious and dark side, and the brutality that's also within her, that always resides in her. And one thing I've noted when talking about her scenes in the trailers is just, like how brutal she is. They have her basically mass murder a bunch of Marines, which is something is interesting, because Oda was always very careful about not having her kill anyone to make sure that, her eventual turn to good is palatable. But in the live action, they have her basically ruthlessly kill a bunch of Marines. But interestingly, they don't have her involved in Igaram's assassination. That is instead given to Mr. Five and Miss Valentine, which I thought was an interesting choice. And I love how her powers are done as well. It looks flawless and exactly like how I would imagine it in live action and more. And it's interesting too, because in this part of the story in the manga, Oda chose to keep her powers a secret, and he kind of makes it insinuate the fact that she has like telekinetic powers. This is like another one of those things that Oda was doing early on in the series, where he would often misdirect you into thinking that the character had telekinetic powers, but in fact it was a different devil fruit, like he did with Buggy and Doflamingo as well. The other interesting sort of side story that they had with Robin is they have her character do this sort of occasional thing where they have her deal with misogyny or allude to her having to deal with it, which is another interesting thing. Like her conversation with Tashigi about being a caged bird, which is a fun nod to the fact that both of their names are birds. Shigi is a snipe bird. It's a flightless bird too, which makes the metaphor even more apparent. But then there's the scene with Wapol where he just straight up is kind of dismissive of her because he believes her to just be an assistant to Crocodile, when honestly Robin could have easily killed him, Chess, and Kuromarimo without breaking a sweat right there, particularly since Wapol didn't have his devil fruit at the time either. And it adds this sense that she does feel trapped somewhere where she doesn't want to be, and it has all this like subtext to her character that obviously we will find out later on. And I'll talk a little bit more about Robin in sort of the more so the reference section. But let's move on to Vivi, or Miss Wednesday. And yeah, she was great as well. I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record, and I think with Vivi specifically, it's very elevated by Charithra Chandran's like performance. Like, she is easily the best actor in this season. You can really tell how much more skilled she is as an actor compared to the other Straw Hats. She has a way of acting with her like eyes and face, which is very much needed given sort of the duality of her character being an undercover agent as well as a princess that is desperate to save her country. And for the first half of the season, also like trying to hide parts of herself to keep a low profile. And I also really like that they play up the fact that she is sort of falling in love with being part of the Straw Hats. This is something that is present in the manga, but I feel like because of the accelerated pacing of it, they make it a lot more apparent and give her moments to sort of really sort of soak in what it's like being with the Straw Hats and how great of people these people are, which is a great call because, again, they won't have as much time to build up her relationship with them and show how much she really is enjoying being a part of this crew, to make that one scene coming at the end of season 3 hit that much harder, because they really need to hit that. And if they don't have Vivi really loving being part of the crew, then that scene won't hit. And so I love that they're really focusing on that with the time that they have. And they also upped her combat skills too, which was nice to have more, to see her in a more active role with her peacock slashers and everything. Although I did find it a little ridiculous that she was able to hold back like Wapol's, like, his mouth with her two pinkies. Like, come on. Like, that's so crazy. But I also love that they managed to somehow keep the hypnotic dance in as well. And they kept it a hypnotic dance, not the perfume dance from the manga. So yeah, Vivi was incredible. I am very much looking forward to seeing more of her in season 3, when she really gets the bulk of her emotional moments. And so, yeah, I'm very much looking forward to seeing Charithra, especially do sort of the end of that arc, when she's like up in the clock tower screaming to stop fighting. Like, that scene is that's gonna hit really hard. So Nami and Luffy, I'm gonna kind of lump in together because they don't quite get as much in this season, which is not a bad thing necessarily. Like Nami and Luffy are still great, but not as much stands out about them compared to the first season, because they were already pretty great in the first season. When it comes to Nami, Emily still shows she's one of the best actors among the Straw Hats. And she gets this little mini arc where she begins the season unsure and insecure about how her skills would translate to the Grand Line and if they'd be enough for it. And it's also great to see her actually like mapping things out, which is something we rarely get to see in the manga. And I also like that Nami, constantly talking about wanting another girl in the crew is setting up, if for those who haven't seen past the season 2 events, what's to come with. Maybe they're alluding to the fact that Vivi is going to join, but then they're going to get that sort of that switch when eventually it's revealed that Robin is actually joining. And I love how they're kind of like playing up that through line as well. Luffy, on the other hand, is pretty good, and Iñaki is still awesome. But like with the first season, while I love Luffy, there's just something slightly off with Luffy. I think it's just that he's a little too aggressive and quick to anger. Sometimes, like, for example, in the Mr. 3 fight, during the part where he's chasing after all the wax clones, Luffy just kind of mindlessly punches at all of them. When in the manga, he kind of, like, takes a moment to step back and he just instinctively knows which one to go for. And again, I'm not saying I have an issue with it because it's different, but because it kind of takes away from what that scene told us about Luffy in the manga. Luffy is capable of calming down and thinking things through with great combat IQ. He may be a dumbass when it comes to everything else, but when he's in a fight, he is a genius. Coming up with creative solutions to fights. But on top of that, he has almost like this amazing animalistic instinct. But the live action kind of makes Luffy this sort of bruiser only, and seems to like struggle with his opponents since the start of the series with season 1, which I get why they can't make the fights as exciting by having Luffy just kind of stomp his opponents, and they can't prolong combat by having Luffy show off his abilities or put him in weird situations and take him out of the fight due to time and budget constraints. But I do still think they lose something by nerfing Luffy this much in the live action, especially because Luffy being kind of weak is going to be a bit of a problem because it reduces the shock of him getting manhandled by Crocodile when he gets to Arabasta. Like the reason why that scene where he gets like skewered by Crocodile was so shocking was that up until that point, Luffy had essentially just beat everyone without much issue. So when he loses so one-sidedly to Crocodile, it was an insane moment. But overall, I still think Luffy is a great adaptation, and his Gomu Gomu stretching effects, like I said, have greatly improved. I just wish they kept a little bit more of sort of the whimsy of Luffy, and they still do. Again, I'm not saying Luffy is bad, but it's just kind of sad because like you see Iñaki in like the promotional material, like he's doing interviews, he's doing all these events to promote the show, and he just seems more like Luffy in real life than he does in the series, which is a little disappointing because you'd like to see that sort of that more whimsical, sillier side of Luffy. But they do nail where it counts, though. Like, I'm not saying that I have an issue with Luffy necessarily, but I think there is still something a little off. And you know what, Luffy, he's an incredibly hard character to adapt. Like, let's be real. Like, Luffy is insanely hard. And so for what they've accomplished, I can't really complain too much about, how well Luffy is actually done because he is done really well. Now, moving on from the Straw Hats, let's talk about the Marines. So Tashigi and Smoker. Overall, I really like Smoker and Tashigi. Like, they looked amazing and behaved exactly like how I felt like they should, with the exception of one minor thing. First off, I absolutely love Tashigi in this adaptation. As you know, Tashigi is one of my favorite characters in the series. She is exactly how she appears in the manga and the anime, but she's given a little bit more to work with by giving her a bit more of her own character growth arc, where they expand on her contending with her sense of justice and how she doesn't have the strength to uphold that justice, but also not being allowed to grow because she's looked down upon because she's either a woman or not seen as a competent soldier. Now, this leads me to the one thing I don't like about this adaptation is how Smoker seems to look down on her and underestimate her. Whereas in the manga, Smoker, always trusted and respected Tashigi, even though he always thought she was annoying and kind of like annoyed at her nerdiness and clumsiness. He still always respected her and held her in high regard. Whereas in the live action, it seems like Smoker had to be convinced of this, and Tashigi really had to stand up to him. And eventually he gets there. But I didn't quite like the fact that he wasn't already there. I think that's one thing that sets Smoker apart from all the other Marines, is that he's different. They have the ice cream scene, which I love that they kept in to show that he is, despite his like gruff and mean exterior, how he's yelling and barking orders at everyone, he is still deep down a very kind person who has a very good moral sense of justice. And again, like him not diminishing Tashigi was also a part of that. Like the fact that, this small little girl or woman is very clumsy and doesn't look very strong. He still respects and trusts Tashigi. And so it kind of like separates him from that. But by taking away one aspect of that, I feel like it kind of makes Smoker look a little bit worse. But speaking of Smoker, he's still great. Like, he looks amazingly cool. The biggest story with him is the Moku Moku fruit. His smoke powers look absolutely amazing. It's mostly reserved for that major set piece at the end of episode 1 versus Luffy, but it functioned and looked seamlessly and so great. I personally love how he quickly moves with it. And they also had a music kind of similar to Caesar's power, where he actually uses the smoke to choke out his opponents, which is something I don't think we've seen him do in the manga, which kind of, I feel like he should. But yeah, I just love how great, like White Blow and White Out looked amazing. And I loved how he used it in creative ways in the live action that we never got to see in the manga. Like he uses it to like slingshot Luffy straight into the ground, which looked like a pretty devastating attack. And you just see like the attacks hit harder. Like when he like hits Sanji through the freaking wall, I didn't, I never imagined that the Moku Moku fruit would actually like be that hard hitting. But yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, I thought it looked awesome. Like it looked really good. But outside of that one minor thing of him looking down on Tashigi to start with, I think Juliet and Callum brought them both to life incredibly well. Okay, so since I've been going on for a while now, the episode's getting a little longer. I'm going to quickly lump in the rest of the Baroque Works agents features that feature in this season, and I think for the most part, they were great as well. David Dastmalchian is awesome as Mr. 3. You can tell he loved his time on this series, especially since he's a huge fan of the series himself, and I thought the Dorodoro wax powers were done really, really well. His partner, Miss Golden Week, on the other hand, is where I had probably the biggest issue with the series. I thought the performance and the look of the character were great, but I just didn't like how like sinister and psychotic they made her. Yes, I will admit part of the reason I don't like this adaptation is because it strays so far from the source material, sort of that laid back and checked out feeling of her character from the manga. But I just think if you're gonna dramatically stray from the original one into this sort of horror-inspired psychopath, which I was actually kind of on board with when they showed her that in the trailers, because I thought, okay, they're going to make her an actual threat, but instead she's like this kind of generic psycho child you see in many movies, and it shows without really, it doesn't really add anything to her character. And in fact, I think because I know what happens to her in the cover stories, that she's not actually a bad person. And so by making her do this, there's like this like cognitive dissonance in my head, like, oh, that kind of sucks that Miss Golden Week is, I think, all probably dead at this point, or at least has gone psycho, like even more like brain dead because of all the paint, which again, the colors trap thing was interesting too, how that worked. Like the paint itself was like chemically altering anyone who got like painted on. But yeah, I don't know. I just wasn't a fan of Miss Golden Week, unfortunately. But Mr. 9, Mr. 5, Miss Valentine, they were all perfect. They literally jumped right off the page onto the screen. And I actually really, like I said, I loved Mr. Nine a little bit more than his original depiction. And Daniel Lasker really brought a lot of flair and character and depth to Mr. Nine that made you really feel for the character despite his sort of absurd wardrobe. Yeah, I think he was definitely a standout among the Baroque Works agents. All right, so this next section is not going to be so much like as sort of organized or scripted, but these are just fun references and changes that I actually really enjoyed. So I think one of the things I really liked was the entire crew being there this time to watch Luffy be saved by the lightning. I think I really liked having all four of them there to witness that instead of just being Zoro and Sanji like it was in the manga, because it is a significant moment. And so having them all there, seeing that craziness unfold, I think was great. It's interesting also that they had Dory be the one to win the duel as opposed to Broggy. And so, yeah, I thought that was really interesting too. I don't know why they made that change. I really can't tell you. Maybe to have like, Broggy be the one to kind of talk to Usopp to sort of, psych him up for his hero moment at the end. I also loved all the little cameos throughout throughout the series, particularly in Logtown. Mr. Hanger, the one that sells Nami or tries to sell Nami all those clothes, he was on the little tram in Logtown. The sketches. So, we didn't actually get the scene where Mr. 13 draws the sketches of the three Straw Hats when they get caught in Whiskey Peak. That awesome scene, unfortunately, wasn't adapted, but the sketches were still there. So that scene was actually still represented. And apparently Oda drew those sketches when Sanji finds the files and he looks through them all and then he just tosses Zoro's aside. So I love that. In fact, there were a lot of moments like that where the specific moment wasn't in the live action, but they made sure to at least reference it a bit. So like some of the other examples of this are like Usopp talking about like, hey, maybe you could live in the whale and all of that stuff is obviously a reference to the fact that Crocus did live inside Laboon in the manga. Similarly, you have that moment where Crocus, we didn't get the awesome like joke where when Zoro, Usopp, Sanji, and Nami all first meet Crocus, you don't have that moment with the boom, boom, boom. But when Luffy does meet Crocus, he does have a little nod to that when he says, like, when someone is asking for someone's name, you usually start by introducing yourself. But then once Luffy introduces himself, Crocus interrupts him and just starts blathering on about, like, all of his own personal details, like he does with Zoro in that joke. So they kept that in. Another example of a reference to a joke that they managed to keep in is Zoro shirtless on the Mary. So in the live action, he's like in the cold, he's shirtless and he doesn't care. And Usopp's like, can you put on a shirt or something? That's obviously a reference to the whole sequence that was cut out with Zoro like training in the freezing water, shirtless, and then he eventually gets lost and he's like wandering out in the snow shirtless. So that's a little nod to that. So yeah, there's a lot of really like fun nods to jokes that weren't, or sequences that were never in there. Another one, this is a more serious one, but there's a moment where in the manga, Luffy, when it's supposedly that Robin assassinates Igaram as he's kind of being a decoy for them, there's a moment where the explosion happens and then immediately Luffy turns around and he says, "Dippadata," or "he was a great man," and then like, he's obviously like really like angry about that, but he's like trying to put on a strong face and just like, let's get moving type of thing. Obviously that scene isn't in the live action, but later on in the Little Garden, when we get that little funeral scene, when Luffy and Vivi are with Dory, we get him saying that Igaram was a great man. Even though, he didn't say it in Whiskey Peak, he was still able to say it during the funeral scene. So as a reference to that, I love that they were able to still have Luffy be able to say that he was a great man. And so yeah, that was a really cool thing. Um, Speaking of Igaram dying, so it seems like Igaram actually does die, just like in season 1 with like Mary, Mary dying, Kaya's butler. It seems like Igaram is dead, and it also seems like I think maybe Mr. Nine is also dead, and Miss Valentine is also dead as well. So the live action is definitely going the opposite way of Oda and basically just killing off everyone, which I guess it leads a little bit more sort of to the live action, more serious tone. So yeah, that was interesting. I don't know. It does seem like he is dead. I don't know that they will bring him back, which is kind of sad because that means we're gonna miss some of that moment, and I don't know how they're gonna actually prove that the Civil War was staged, because obviously Igaram is the one that finds the little kid and he brings the kid before everyone, who eventually tells that they saw Mr. 2 change into Cobra and all of that stuff, and so they'll probably have to rework all of that. And then maybe even his wife Terracotta won't actually be part of the story at all, which again will be kind of a shame because I really like her. Another moment that they kind of alluded to that wasn't actually present in the live action is obviously the moment where like Mr. Nine and Miss Monday, they actually turn on Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine to protect Vivi once it was found out that she was, a princess. And although you never see them attack, Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine, there was still that moment where he's kind of sitting there drinking in the bar. And instead of like telling Mr. 9 and Mr. 5, or sorry, Miss Valentine and Mr. 5 where Vivi was going, out of like respect for their partnership, he doesn't sell her out. Which again is still a nice nod to that moment, that they were able to somehow still keep the essence of that of his character in there, which again was great. And this one isn't quite the same because it is still the exact same scene, but I did love that while there were no lines exchanged, Nami was still the first one to immediately console Vivi when Igaram dies. I really liked how they handled that as well. And then similarly, like the climb up the Drum Rockies, obviously they couldn't have the whole avalanche happen with Sanji getting injured then and having Luffy carry Sanji all the way up. But at least they were still able to sort of have that moment where Luffy has to grab Sanji as he's falling with his head. And then they use that moment at the end to kind of have him sling Sanji all the way up, which I thought was really great, because I was really wondering how they were going to handle that, because based on the trailers, it didn't look like Luffy was carrying Sanji, so it seemed like Sanji was climbing himself, but then you have moments where he's actually injured, so yeah, I actually like that. The only thing I do miss about that is that they didn't have Sanji sacrifice himself, because I do think that is an important aspect to his character, where he basically sacrifices himself and puts his own body in the way to help Luffy and Nami. And so, yeah, that's the one thing I do miss about that, but I'm glad that they were still able to get that in there. Moving on to like just things that I also really enjoyed that don't necessarily reference anything else was, I love that the Unluckies are still here. Like I mentioned in the trailer video, or the trailer reaction, the fact that the Unluckies here is just unreal. So, I mean, I thought for sure they were going to get cut, but they, not only are they there, but they have an extended fight sequence, and even to the point where Sanji still breaks Miss Friday's neck with his legs by twisting them on while Miss Friday is sitting on the windowsill, which again, I did not think that would make it in there, but holy crap. I mean, it looks brutal in live action, but it's just amazing that it's still there. And then his fight with Mr. 13, I also love that it's a static shot and you just see mayhem happening in the background as the Dendemushi is on the hold music. Oh, and speaking of the hold music, So I missed this the first time, and I didn't actually catch this until I was rewatching it in the Japanese version. But the hold music is Believe, the second opening theme to the anime, which I cannot believe I missed it the first time because, Believe is one of my favorite openings in all of One Piece. And yeah, it plays for a significant amount of time, and it is Believe. Like, if you really listen to it, it's basically just an instrumental version of that opening theme, which is freaking awesome. Another really fun little nod is the newspapers. Like, the newspapers are really fun. I think they publish some of the close-ups of the newspaper, but like from the episodes you can see like references to how like Iceberg is like the Grand Line's like favorite mayor. You can also see an article with Shushu's new pet shop, and then there's a story about Bonnie kind of up and coming, which is really cool as well. And then obviously there are more like story relevant ones, like with the Vera uprising, and also the princess about Arabasta missing and all that stuff, and some articles about the Revolutionary Army. But yeah, the newspapers are really fun to see, like little tidbits of things added in there. Usopp's story that he tells to Brogy when he's trying to distract him while Nami is like trying to escape. And that story is interesting because he's literally talking about his fight with Miss Merry Christmas, about a mole lady. So that could mean one of two things. This is one of his lies that will eventually come true, which I hope that this is the direction that they're going. It's kind of like a foreshadow to that fight, or they're cutting that fight in the live action, and this is their way of sort of homaging it. I don't think that they're going to cut it because the thing I kind of come back to is they showed Chopper's Rumble Ball. So without the Miss Merry Christmas and Mr. Four fight, when is he going to use that? Now, obviously, they can come up with a whole new way of doing that, but I feel like that would be a waste. Like, why would you cut that? So I think this is more of a foreshadow than an actual homage. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see in season 3 how they handle that. The other things that I was very interested in seeing was the dragon moment. So Dragon shows up in Logtown, saves Luffy like he does in the manga. But what's really interesting about that moment is that it pretty much confirms that he does have a devil fruit, and it's like a weather controlling or storm powered one, because you can clearly tell he is the one influencing the wind to just knock away Smoker on there. And so yeah, and I think the actor Rigo Sanchez, like on his Instagram, he actually says that he has a devil fruit. So I think they just inadvertently confirmed that Dragon does in fact have a devil fruit, even though it's not been explicitly confirmed in the manga. Although, I mean, most of us know he has one. He has to have one. It's pretty obvious. And speaking of Smoker, we actually get to see Smoker fight Miss Thursday, who we only get a mention of in the manga as being Mr. 11's partner. But here we actually get to see her, and as a bonus content, Oda actually drew what she'd look like in the manga, as well as the fact that he reveals that she's Mr. 4's younger sister, which makes sense with the baseball theme, and it makes even more sense that she's a pitcher, while her older brother, Mr. 4, is a batter. So that was really interesting to find out. And this one I missed earlier, kind of like adapting scenes that were not actually adapted, was Usopp and Luffy making the snowman and the snow queen. So we don't actually get to see Luffy making his famous Yukidaru-san, but we do see that Usopp made his snow queen. But by the time we actually move outside and get to see it, it's pretty much already melted. But I do love that reference to the Snow Queen from the manga and the anime. The other really interesting thing when we get to like the more Baroque works related stuff is we get to see the moment Wapol gets his Baku Baku fruit, or the Munch Munch fruit, which is given to him by Baroque works in the live action. In the anime and the manga, I don't believe we know where he got that. He just has it one day. And one thing that may confuse some fans is why Wapol already has his tin jaw and tin body, because many people assumed that Wapol got that appearance due to his devil fruit. So why does he look like this already before eating his fruit? But if you really pay attention to the manga, it's implied that those alterations to his body were done by the Ishii 20 out of sort of either necessity or choice. And we never saw it in the manga, but we do see that when Dalton slashes Wapol, the Ishii 20 immediately jump in and patch him up by repairing his tin plates. And so, yeah, that his metal body is the result of the Ishii 20 enhancing him, and so not as a result of the devil fruit. And so it was interesting seeing that Wapol was working with Baroque Works. But yeah, I imagine that scene was a little weird for some people. The last thing I kind of wanted to mention in terms of sort of the fun changes and references, this was a kind of an interesting change. So the very final scene, we get to see Crocodile, Joe Manganiello playing Crocodile, and it has him saying that he wants to go after the One Piece, which, for those of us who know and read the manga or watched the anime, at this point in time, Crocodile has kind of all but given up his dream of going after the One Piece after getting his butt handed to him by Whitebeard, several years earlier. So it is interesting that the live action is actually having him recognize his desire to go after the One Piece already and still intact, because he doesn't actually rediscover that passion until after Luffy beats him. And even then, it still takes until, even in the current time, he's still not like fully on board with it. And this is something maybe I have to mention in the manga spoiler section, because we haven't even seen this in the anime yet. But yeah, it is interesting that Crocodile still wants to go after the One Piece at this point in time. So it'll be interesting to see how they work that into season 3. Maybe they're kind of setting that up because obviously he won't face a lot of enemies that want the One Piece until he gets to, the post-time skip era. And so maybe they want to have a little bit more of a personal connection with Crocodile, as both of them wanting the One Piece, and whose sort of philosophy and whose will is stronger. Maybe to kind of build up that final conflict with Crocodile and make it a little bit more personal to Luffy and Crocodile, and not just Luffy fighting on behalf of Vivi. And so yeah, I found that very interesting when that the season ended with that scene. So yeah. All right, so this section is really going to go into a lot more spoilers, just even beyond what's in the anime, and sort of the fact that it reincorporates things with the benefit of hindsight. So one thing that I really found fun and interesting is that they show us the conversation between Roger and Garp just before his execution, and telling him about his child and wanting him to keep him to keep him safe. And this is setting up a red herring by making the live action only viewers think that Luffy is potentially Roger's son, and the fact that he's not talking about Ace here, because obviously the live action audience has no idea about Ace. And so, yeah, I thought that was a really fun choice, and seeing that. Of course, Bartolomeo being included was really fun, seeing that. I thought he was incorporated really well. It is interesting, though, that that they had Bartolomeo meet Luffy, because obviously in the anime and the manga, Luffy hadn't met Bartolomeo, and he had only witnessed Luffy surviving the execution tower blowing up. But overall, I really liked and enjoyed Bartolomeo's inclusion here. Sabo's cameo was another interesting one, which makes sense why he's there. But I also kind of feel bad for anyone in a very specific moment in their One Piece journey, because if for anyone who hasn't reached Dressrosa yet in the manga or the anime, but felt that they were safe in watching season 2, thinking that they won't get spoilers, there's this really small population of people who are like right at that moment who watch the live action and we'll see Sabo and like, what the heck is that guy doing there alive? And so there's that really small population of people who are like either reading through the manga and haven't reached, that point in the story, and so yeah, I kind of feel bad for those folks who are kind of got spoiled as to the fact that Sabo is still alive. Although, like I've mentioned in the in our episode rewatches, that there's a lot of clues that Sabo is still alive if you're paying attention, and many of us did kind of figure that out as we were watching it. But yeah, it is kind of sad for those folks that are watching it more casually. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot more opportunities and foreshadowing that Robin is secretly helping them in any way she can throughout this time period. And so yeah, I did like that they had more moments where Robin is kind of secretly helping them because of the fact that that she is kind of secretly rooting for them because of the fact that she knows that Luffy is a D. Of course, the biggest sort of addition and retcon is the addition of the Rumbar Pirates and Brook. Now, for me, I like this scene. I like this scene a lot, and I thought Brook and the Rumbar Pirates were great. But the fact that Brook is revealed like this is pretty evident that the series has no intention of going past Enies Lobby. If it even gets that far, to be honest. The reason I say that is because like the reveal that Brook is associated with Laboon is such a huge moment. I've talked about it in the past, but like that is one of the biggest shocker moments in the entire series. It's such a huge reveal. Like, when I originally read that, and I've talked about this in the past, but like, yeah, finding out that circles back to Laboon is so mind blowing. And so, for live action viewers, I think what their thought process was that like, all right, we're not going to get to Thriller Bark, so let's just have this nice, really cool moment to actually get to see Brook in live action. That's kind of how I interpreted his addition, because otherwise, if you wanted to include Brook, the way I would have done it is like you could have all the Rumbar Pirate stuff there, but perhaps you'd only get to see like a faint little like silhouette of Brook sort of playing violin to Laboon, but you don't actually get to see like what he's wearing. Maybe you get to see the afro and the top hat, but try not to like reveal the fact that like, okay, this skeleton in the future who's got the same afro and the same clothes and the same top hat. Otherwise, because that ruins that surprise. So I think for me, and there's a lot of moments like this. Like another one is, again, circling back to Sanji, is when he's really caring for Nami. And I love that they play up the fact that their sort of friendship and relationship, he's so concerned about Nami being sick is because it reminds him of his mother, Sora. And I think with Sora, I love that Sanji talks about that moment from the manga where he serves him that disgusting food and the maid like eats it and like she spews out poison from her mouth. Even though in this he refers to her as the nurse, but like it's even the same right down to the ingredients that he uses in that bento box. And I love that they included that. But I think, again, the reason why they decided to include that and reincorporate that, I think was more for the fact that, yeah, we're not getting to Whole Cake Island, let alone Thriller Bark. And so, yeah, I think that's another really cool moment. Again, we got during the reverie, we get a few references to events in the future, like Wapol mentioning that the Fishman Queen was assassinated, referring to Queen Otohime. Like, we're not getting to Fishman Island, so we might as well throw that in there too. Similarly, they're setting up plot threads of the ruler starting to question the efficacy and necessity of the Shichibukai, which eventually leads to Cobra and Fujitora sort of pursuing their abolishment after the Whole Cake Island arc. And so, again, they're kind of reincorporating all of that in there as well. Another one that I really liked that's kind of hidden is Usopp reaching out for Luffy at the end of Drum when they're about to, go on the sled down the ropeway. And it almost seems like a reversal set. And I don't know this for sure, but to me, it looked really similar. So like in the live action, you have the sled taking off, and Usopp turns back to Luffy and says, "Hey, Luffy," and he stretches his hand out to grab him, and then Luffy then stretches his hand back and grabs Usopp. Obviously, this was also meant to sort of make sure that it lines up with the manga, where we have Luffy kind of like, actually no, it was Usopp that was almost falling off the sled in the manga. So that means, yeah, they did actually intentionally reverse it, where to have Luffy kind of be the one hanging off the side, almost falling off. And this, I believe, is a direct reference to and reversal of Usopp's apology moment at the end of Water 7 in Enies Lobby, when Usopp finally decides to apologize for leaving the Straw Hats, and then Luffy extends his arm. And I think this is the moment to kind of reference that as well. So I like all these things that they reincorporated back into the story with the benefit of hindsight. All right, so now let's talk about some of the things that I haven't covered in this podcast at all. These now go beyond what we've covered, and these are more sort of things that go beyond this moment. So I think the biggest one, oh, and this will also include like the manga spoilers too, so things that haven't necessarily been adapted into the anime as well. Actually, no, I think most of these have all been at least adapted into the anime. But the biggest one, and I think one of my favorite changes, is how Luffy convinces Laboon to not knock his head against the red line. And the way he does this, instead of like challenging Laboon to a duel, Luffy kind of connects with him and sings Bing Sake to stop Laboon and to connect with him. And during that song, you can see him doing the Nika dance, which is so perfect. I bet you Oda is probably thinking like, I wish I had done this. And so, yeah, I think that's one thing that I really, really liked seeing. That one definitely brought a tear to my eye, seeing that, because it is so perfect in such a great way, because it not only incorporates Luffy as the god of freedom, essentially, and the sun god, as well as the fact that, yeah, it loops back around to the fact that it's associated with Brook, the Bing Sake, and Shanks, and all of that, and it helps Luffy connect with Laboon in a more, I don't know, a spiritual way, I would say, and I really liked that change. The other reference to Nika is that when we go to Dory's home, we see that he's sort of whittled like different wooden statues, and you see 3 of them. You see the sun god Nika, and you see him kind of looking like Luffy, but he's not quite the same. And then you have the middle one, which is the manga version of Brogy, which is pretty cool. And then you see the third one is the original silhouetted version of Loki. So Loki, obviously, I guess this is kind of manga stuff, but we've seen Loki now, but in the original like flashback with Lola and all of that, we saw that version of Loki. When I was watching this episode the first time through, I was like, why does this silhouette look so familiar? Like, I feel like I know that one, but I could not place it. And then I had to look it up, and it was Loki, his original sort of look in the silhouette as he's sort of proposing to Lola, that we saw in Thriller Bark. And then the last one I would say is Brogy mentioning Semla, the sweetbread, while he's having or no, was it Brogy or Dory? I can't remember. Well, one of them are talking to the Straw Hats, and they mention Semla, the sweetbread, and this is obviously a reference to Big Mom and what drove her to laying waste to the Elbaf during the fasting, the solstice fasting, the winter solstice fasting ritual, and that she couldn't hold it in, and that's what ended up causing her to be kicked out and taken in by Mother Carmel. So yeah, I thought that was an interesting little note as well. But yeah, this episode is getting really long, so I could go into all the other Easter eggs, but that would take forever. And there are plenty of other people that have done that far better than I can. So definitely check them out. I personally really like Artur and the One Piece Explained YouTube channels. They're both really awesome at finding all these little references and little Easter eggs. So yeah, those were my thoughts on season 2 of the live action. And I loved it. I've already seen it twice, once in English and once in Japanese dub. And they're both awesome experiences, especially since for the Japanese dub, they get many of the anime regulars to come back and voice their respective characters in the live action. So it's really fun to see their different takes on the characters. And season 3, as you probably already know, is in production. And I believe they're still in the process of shooting at the moment. And I would say if we're estimating the production lengths of season 2 and applying them to season 3, by my estimation, we should probably get season 3 towards the end of 2027, like around the winter time, I think. But of course, that's still a long ways away and things can change. But thankfully, it's not going to be the same 3 years between, that we had to wait between season 1 and 2. I will, of course, continue to cover the live action with any trailers that drop, as well as, I don't know, if they ever release the remake anime, The One Piece, if that ever gets released. But yeah, so anyways, if you've stuck around this long, thanks for staying and listening to all of that. Needless to say, I love the second season. Definitely keep checking it out, because we want to get those numbers up to make sure that Netflix keeps, making these seasons. And yeah, thank you. And if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. It really does help. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Next episode, we're going to get back into Zou. And yeah, this one's going to be a crazy one because so many new things get revealed. But anyways, check out my Instagram at SunnyGo Podcast if you want updates. And as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. Stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye.